Mac, congratulations. We're alive. We made it through the shittiest year in recent memory.
Hey now, to be fair, most people made it through this year. Worldwide.
There are plenty of exceptions to that.
Oh yeah, a small number relative to the teeming, squirming billions of humans on the planet. I can already tell
you're just going to be a fucking pointless devil's advocate just to be a jackass, aren't you?
No.
2016, if there's one thing that almost everyone can agree with about 2016, is that it sucked a bag of 1,000 dicks. It was a shitty year. And if there's one thing that 2016 has taught us, it's that no matter how bad something gets, no matter how bleak, hopeless, dim, depressing things are, it can and will get worse.
Yeah, but I thought that a long time ago, and people kept calling me a curmudgeon and pessimistic and whiny.
And here we are.
And I'm saying now, you didn't listen to me then, well, listen to me now. 2016 wasn't that bad. I mean, it was bad, and a lot of the things that happened in it were bad.
Uh-huh.
But
That is how one judges a bad year most of the time, no?
it can and may get worse.
I'm cautiously pessimistic about 2017.
Well, fine, but we're not here to talk about the future. We're here to gorge our egos on the past and reconsider where time and space went wrong.
So, we have a nice long list here of crappy things that happened during 2016, and a couple of good things that happened too. And just in case you don't want to spend the next 3 consecutive hours listening to us ramble on about how shitty this last year was, here's a nice little summary for you. Mac, what's the first thing on our list?
All the people that died.
Right, the celebrities, etc. There's also Zika. That's kind of how the year started off.
DPRK blew something up.
There was also the anti-immigrant sentiment that became widespread in Europe and, North America.
Related to that, of course, is the election in Austria.
And the election in the United States.
The Arctic melted a lot more than people thought it would.
Syria is a absolute clusterfuck of the highest order.
All the shootings, each and every one of them.
And the terrorist attacks.
And Saudi Arabia attacking Yemen.
There was also the water crisis in Flint, Michigan.
The collapse of Venezuela's economy.
Oh, and have to mention Bernie Sanders losing and how crappy that was.
Well, sure, that sucked, but I don't think it was nearly as bad as all the drones that have been flying around.
Oh, the democratically elected government of Brazil was, depending on how you look at it, there was a soft coup or a hard impeachment there.
Well, and on the more legal side of horrible elections, we've got the election of Duterte in the Philippines.
The monster, yes.
Yeah.
There was also a lot of police killings in the United States.
Guantanamo still hasn't closed for the, 60th year in a row or whatever.
Yep. There was also some really aggressive malware that was released in 2016, including a new form of ransomware called Locky, and a very aggressive botnet software called Mirai.
And, of course, it wouldn't be 2016 if we left Trump off this list, both, I'd say, the election as a whole and his winning.
Yep. Also, the Yankee feds doubled down on their Class A drug status of marijuana and also added CBD to the list of Class A drugs, which makes no fucking sense at all. And Trudeau also proved himself to be a wanker, not that we didn't already know that.
And at the end of the year, to round everything off, a capstone to the year as a whole, Castro died.
Fidel Castro passed away. There were some good things that happened last year, too.
A few.
Not nearly as many. Justice Scalia died. He was a monster, so everyone was pretty happy about that.
Plenty of discoveries of diseases, cures for blindness, and the like.
The Colombian Civil War, after over half a century of conflict and civilian deaths, finally ended.
That is probably the single best thing that happened in 2016.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
But on the other end of more Schadenfreude than anything else, the collapse of American liberalism, warms the cockles of my heart.
Yeah, 2016 was the year that liberalism pretty much
Fell off the wagon, shit the bed.
I don't want to say was extinguished because, it's still there, but proved itself to be an abject failure. How about?
Stubbed its toe,
There was also a really massive general strike in India.
And in France.
Yes, actually, the one in India was, I think, the biggest general strike in human history.
Yep.
Which is pretty momentous. And there were some sort of mixed bag items on the 2016 list as well, including the infamous Dakota Access Pipeline,
which, depending on who you ask, of course, is either gone forever or an inevitable project that will be built no matter what. And, of course, we got the Paris Accords, which will, as per most of them, probably go nowhere, but at least was an interesting part of the year.
Also, how could we forget Brexit? That happened.
Beautiful, beautiful Brexit.
There was also the Brazil Olympics, which everyone is expecting to be a massive shit show.
And it was only a moderate shit show.
Well, yeah. Also, the Black Lives Matter movement gained momentum in the United States.
Yes.
And that was, kind of a mixed bag, too, because the whole reason that it did gain momentum was because of all of the horrible things that happened to African Americans in 2016, and before that also, so...
Yeah, many of the good things on our list are a result of the bad things, and many of the bad things on our list are a result of the,
Worst things?
Worst things. Other things. Other years. That's right. At the end of the day, it's not 2016's fault.
It's history's
fault. It's history's fault. I guess, where should we start? Let's start on the lighter side of things.
Yes, 2016, a year in review. We've had a few days to be thankful that it's all over and we're all still in one piece. Well, why don't you start, Mac? We have a nice list of shitty things and some not
and
as
good
shitty
things.
Yeah,
as
there's
well.
like 3 or 4 good things.
There was an amazing abundance of good things.
We can count on one hand the number of good things that happened in the news in 2016. 2016 was not as bad as World War I or II. It wasn't as bad as maybe the Black Death in the Middle Ages.
Well, you say maybe. I think that's a definite case. But we don't have to really be that extreme. You said, in recent memory or in our memory or whatever, I'd argue that, the year that happened after September 11th was bad. And not just because a lot of people died in the World Trade Centers, although that was a nice starting point for an awful period of time.
Yeah.
But it was the paranoia, the fear, the weirdness that suddenly just took hold of everybody for an extended period of time. The fact that the United States was able to do whatever the fuck it wanted to do, and unlike now, there wasn't even a attempt, or even, no one really cared about trying to oppose it, and even just symbolically, it was just sort of like, yep, you've been wronged, go do whatever you think you need to do to make it right again. And that ended up leading them into Afghanistan and then eventually Iraq.
Yeah, but I mean...
The Patriot Act, which I guess is still around. Guantanamo Bay really became a thing around then, too.
Right. Yeah,
I mean, it had been a military facility.
Hey,
but
Guantanamo Bay, that's one of the things on our list. That it wasn't closed.
But Guantanamo Bay and so many other things started in 2001.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. The basis for the shittiness that was 2016 was partially laid in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. Just take one perfect example, Syria, right?
Yeah.
If it weren't for the Iraq War that George Bush ordered, then there would be no ISIS, and we wouldn't have a fucking refugee crisis on our hands right now, at least not from Syria.
Yeah, probably not.
So, yeah, 2001, 2, 3 sucked. Also sucked dicks. I'm not disputing that. But I think that 2016 was like a fine wine. Over time, these contradictions in society had time to sort of, ferment. And 2016 was the year the cork was taken out of the bottle.
You could go with 2004 and 5 when the Iraq War really started to become a shit show. 6 and 7 with the military surges, where it was the most violent portions of the war in Iraq.
Okay,
2008 with an economic collapse all around the world.
No, but there was... Okay, yeah, I'm not saying... Neither of us are saying that 2016 was the shittiest year, but it was, I think, worse than... I mean, the 2008 financial crisis did not happen in 2016, but we still are feeling the effects from it in 2016. And it was all these shitty things that happened over the last 10 years that all accumulated together into one anal polyp of a year that was finally popped.
I suppose so, but the popping of that polyp... If I had said, oh, at some point in the future, horrible things will happen, and it'll be kind of like this, and people go, well, yeah, probably. Well, I say that now, and everyone's like, yeah, but Trump. But, it can't get worse than this, or even just, it's so terrible now that I don't even really want to think about the future. That's the kind of attitude that I think is problematic in the way people treated 2016.
I think you're right. I mean, people. The one thing, especially if we're talking in the context of the American election, where a lot of liberals, especially, have just written off the next 4 years, and they're just like, well, who can we get for president in 2020? And it is a very problematic attitude because we need to be fighting and organizing now, today, yesterday, tomorrow.
Sure.
This is the time where people need to be militant as fuck and need to be organizing and building a political movement in the United States to resist Trump instead of just saying, oh, we lost the election, better give him a good chance to govern and be fair, even though the Republicans have been cheating like a bunch of disgusting, dirty motherfuckers for the last, 8 years.
So have the Democrats. Come on. Everybody likes to cheat. That's how the political system works.
That's why Bernie Sanders lost, arguably, but...
Well, we'll get into that. Anyway.
So we have a list here of crappy things that happened, important people that died...
Some less important people that died.
Yeah, and we're just gonna go ahead and as a nice review of 2016, just to remind ourselves of all the crappy things that have happened, and pray to Sagan that we don't have to that 2017 might be a little bit better, even though it's totally not going to be. It's going to get worse.
Yeah.
The one thing that I think is probably most well known in most people's minds regarding 2016, other than the election, is the deaths of musicians and celebrities and people that that people liked a lot.
Well, that's how it started, right? I mean, back in January, February is when there was just like a whole string of really well-known and not necessarily very old musicians and actors who just died, with every 4 or 5 days. A famous person died for about 2 months.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh my god, this is odd and just creepy and not a good harbinger for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And as they turned out, they were completely fucking right.
Prince and David Bowie, Princess Leia, Muhammad Ali, Leonard Cohen.
As far as the whole celebrity thing goes, because there was too many of them, and depending on, the kind of movies you watch, the sort of people you care about, the music, all that kind of stuff, some of them will hit people harder than most. But I think the fair point is that this year, pretty much no matter who you were, there was someone you respected or admired in art and culture that died. The biggest or one of the biggest names in whatever interest you might have.
Yeah.
So that sucks. That sucks big time.
Yeah, that sucked. And it sucked for a lot of people and a lot of different people. Anyone that liked Star Wars was a little bit sad about Princess Leia dying.
Yeah.
And everyone that, my mom was a big David Bowie fan. And while I'm not fond of his music, but I recognize, and same with Prince, that they were such important contributions to musical history, that they helped bring their ideas were so different and they were so well suited to their craft that they were able to help bring art and culture forward into the modern era.
Yeah, they innovated.
Through their contributions.
They did new and interesting things. And whether that was in some cases 30 years ago or even just up until they died, these are all people who did something of worth and value and meaning. Look, a lot of celebrities died. I don't think it's really worth getting into the sort of reasons why all of them matter, because there's arguably hundreds, and we could just spend all our time becoming a celebrity Hollywood expose bullshit.
Yeah.
And while, as I said, I respect them all, basically, I'm not interested in their personal lives. I'm not really interested in necessarily even how they died, but it is just sort of, that's, I think, sort of the introduction to the year was celebrities, people you heard about dying, and pretty consistently.
And for all of our listeners out there, if you're already starting to maybe tear up a little bit or get a bit sad, don't you worry, because we mentioned the deaths of people we love and celebrities first on this list because it was the least depressing thing on it.
Yeah, as I said, this is sort of on the lighter side of 2016.
The next thing on our 2016 review is Zika. Everyone remembers Zika. It is the mosquito-transmitted virus which causes microcephaly, small, tiny heads in babies. And this outbreak happened in Brazil and several other countries in that area, most of which, all of which don't allow abortions for women. So basically, there is a whole bunch of children growing up in Brazil and in Colombia and in a couple other cases in other countries who will have really, really difficult, challenging lives in countries that, for the most part, do not have adequate social services or assistance to people with unique needs like these kids are going to have.
Yeah, I appreciate the euphemisms, but in the spirit of 2016, look, they're going to have really shitty lives. That's the basic of it. It's not. There's not really much of any other way to put it. Particularly,
and their
in the
mothers
case of,
are going to have very challenging lives.
Well, yeah, and with South America's not usually very effective healthcare and social safety net in place, it's going to be bad. And I guess the good news is Zika has by now basically is no longer an issue for the most part.
Well, there's no vaccine for it.
Sure, but
I think it's still a problem.
Well, is it?
Yeah, they mentioned it on the travel advisory for when I'm going down south later in the year.
Oh, well,
yeah.
I guess I just forgot about it then.
Because so many other shitty things happened.
Yeah, it just felt like it just...
Well, this is how the news cycle goes.
Me.
The Zika's an old story now, so they don't cover it, and
I guess. You know what? You're right, because, and this is going to sound really fucking ignorant of me, but I could swear it went away when the Brazil Olympics ended.
Yeah. Funny that, hey?
Yeah, well, and that didn't help them either. I mean, the Olympics were not exactly a good or bad thing this year. Didn't exactly bring the world together in the spirit of, brotherly sportsmanship.
Well, the thing about the Olympics is that everyone was expecting it to be a massive shit show, and then it turned out to be, pretty okay.
Yeah, it was a 2016 miracle. Nobody died. And in the case of Brazil, yeah, we had Zika, but we also had the, I don't know where it started exactly, the corruption scandal in the Brazilian government, which led to investigations, which led to a bunch of different people getting...
Well, Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, was basically investigated for corruption, and she was impeached, and the opposition party took power. Now, unlike the United States or other democratic countries where if the president is impeached, the vice president gets to become, who is from the same political party as them, takes power. And even though the president themselves has lost power, the vice president is from their same party. They have mostly the same ideas, more or less the same agenda, and things go in kind of due course. In Brazil, it's a little bit different than that, because when the president was impeached for very mild doesn't even begin to describe the quote-unquote corruption that Dilma Rousseff engaged in. The opposition party basically took hold, right?
Yeah.
And so this is not the kind of impeachment that we are used to in the West, where it's not a complete change of guard. It's not a complete change of power from one political movement to another. So what Dilma Rousseff, she did make some tactical errors as president of Brazil, and she did, I don't know enough about Brazilian economics to know if it was how much she impacted the economic situation in Brazil, but Brazil's economy kind of went into the toilet for a little while. Dilma Rousseff is from the same political party as Lula da Silva, who is very famous in Brazil, criticized for being, the big boss man or whatever, pulling the corruption strings, blah, blah, blah. But they're both Dilma and Lula are from the Workers' Party in Brazil. And the opposition party hasn't been able to win a fucking election in over a decade in Brazil. They lose election after election after election, not unsimilar to Venezuela, where you have the opposition constantly trying to have a recall referendum vote on Chavez and Maduro, and they keep fucking losing. Brazil was in a very similar situation. So I think what the actual corruption charge against Dilma Rousseff was that she fudged some numbers on economic spreadsheets to make the economy look like it was doing better than it actually was. This is the kind of thing that politicians do the world over as a matter of due course.
Yeah, what's the unemployment rate in Canada today? I don't fucking know.
Yeah, like in the United States, when if you stop looking for a job after
Do you mean the people who are unemployed, or do you mean the people who are actively on unemployment rolls?
Or not in the workforce?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically I think it was basically just some what most countries in the world would consider normal fudging of numbers to make themselves look better. That was the corruption charge that was labeled against Dilma Rousseff. Now, the problem is that this coincided, all these allegations and whatnot, the activity from the right wing in Brazil against the Workers' Party and against the sitting government was happening at a time where the Brazilian currency was devaluing and their economy was not doing so well. She became a scapegoat for the economic problems that were occurring in Brazil, and the recall vote was pushed, and these right-wing motherfuckers who haven't been able to win an election in, like, almost a generation, all of a sudden were able to take power in Brazil despite not winning an election, and basically impeaching a president on no actual wrongdoing on her part of all, other than some mistakes that she made as a president. And now they have a 20-year freeze on additional government spending in the economy. And, and if we're talking, the reason we got to talking about this was Zika. If there's any other fucking time that Brazil's healthcare system needs a little bit of a boost, it's probably now, but that's not going to happen because motherfuckers on the right wing who engaged in a coup d'etat froze the fucking government spending because they're a bunch of fucking assholes and fuck them.
Yeah, but hey, at least they had money to do the Olympics somehow.
Yes. Isn't that funny how that happens?
Well, sure. And then probably got it through advertising or whatever. But that's just one country among many.
Yes.
And Brazil is, after all, a pretty big country.
But enough about Brazil. Mac, what's next on our list?
Next on, the hits keep coming in 2016. There was also the Austrian election, where I don't like throwing around the word Nazi very much.
This is about as close as you're going to get.
Well, let me put it this way. The party that almost won, and by almost I mean got about 45% of the vote, is a direct continuation of an actual Nazi party during World War II.
Yeah.
Like, they're not a Nazi party in a literal sense now, but they're like the direct offspring of one. And hey, who knows where they go from here? Possibly towards more Nazism. But in any event,
I don't think it's just Austria, though.
I'm not saying just Austria. I'm saying is that particularly
right. That election
in a country that traditionally had no political movement whatsoever, nothing changed. They had a massive grand coalition of every single establishment party just ruling the country for like the last 40 years. That's it. And now suddenly there is a extremely far right party that's completely smashed up that whole established order. But as you said, it's not just Austria. I mean, pick a country in Europe at this point. There's a growing, or at least vocal, far-right, neo-Nazi, Nazi, fascist movement of some order or description somewhere.
Yeah, the beginnings of this we saw especially in Golden Dawn in Greece. That was the direct result of the economic crisis in Greece.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing in countries like France, the far-right party is gaining popularity. They have a vote this year, an election in France, and Jesus fucking Christ, I hope the Nazis don't win.
You're in favor of the right-wing party, then, eh?
Yeah, the good old boys right-wing party. And also you see anti-immigrant rhetoric in Britain, especially against the Poles. Now with Brexit, you have Eastern Europe, a lot of the places where immigrants are coming in from Syria and North Africa and elsewhere. There's a lot of racist, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee sentiment, and I think that it's not coming at a good time because the refugee crisis in Europe is coinciding with the sort of continued economic woes of the European Union, especially outside of Germany. So it's almost like the worst time for refugees to want to take refuge in a country where it is the time which they will be most likely blamed for economic problems that are going on already, regardless whether or not the refugees are there or not.
Yeah, it's the bulwark of liberalism in Eurasia is not looking quite so pleasant and appealing, to be honest.
According to Joe Biden, there's only 2 countries in the world where liberalism is looking good.
Oh, yeah?
Canada and Germany.
Germany?
Yeah.
Really?
Even though Angela Merkel is technically a conservative. But
and her cabinet's full of people who don't particularly like immigrants either.
Germany has had a much better position on refugees than any other country in Europe.
For the most part, but even they're sort of getting. I think even Germany and Sweden and a few others are basically saying, screw it, let's just close borders. Let's just stop them from coming in. We have as many as we want or more. So no thanks.
Germany took in a lot more than other countries.
Yeah, because they wanted them. They had a labor shortage relative to everyone else. That's it. That is not that they're nicer people, and as soon as that labor shortage goes away, they will close the borders just as fast as anyone else.
Well, it's not that simple. It's also the fact that the economy in Germany has been doing much better than other countries in Europe, and so the old Marxist position about where does racism come from. It comes from and is exploited by class divisions, where you have regular working people that blame the problems of capitalism on immigrants, on racial minorities, and if everyone has enough food to put on the table, what the fuck is the point of blaming each other for problems you don't have? And so that capitalism itself is what generates and exacerbates the racial differences and the racism, and Germany's economy has been doing much better, so you didn't have as much of a backlash. There was still some, and it continues on to this day, but way less than in other countries.
No, fine, fair enough. I mean, they also don't have a particularly powerful fascist movement in Germany for now, but great. That's a real fucking low bar, to be honest. But it isn't. It's not just Europe that has had a interesting time trying to address neo-Nazis and
yes, across the Atlantic,
whatever. Yes, even over here in our pleasant, isolated, and well defendable continent, the alternative right, otherwise known as Nazis, the alt-right. The extremely alt-right. They're so cool, they're alt-right.
The 2016 was the year when basically neo-Nazi rhetoric became mainstream.
Yeah, for the most part. Definitely the memes, the rhetoric of it. Yeah, the even just in the media in general, there seemed to be just sort of such a sort of pathetic just giving up on trying to even argue against any of this. Like, well, these are opinions people hold, so therefore, whatever. We're just going to talk about it.
Well, I mean, that's part of the bankruptcy of liberalism, which we will get into much later in this podcast.
Yeah, maybe.
If we make it that far. The fact of the matter is that neo-Nazi groups, alt-right groups, racist groups, misogynistic groups played a role in the election of Donald Trump, and made it into mainstream discourse to the point. And actually, I thought the turning point, and I was so disappointed in Hillary fucking Clinton when she said this, when she basically, by acknowledging the alt-right movement as a thing, that was the point at which they were considered mainstream, was when Hillary Clinton argued against them.
Well,
up until that, they were sort of like considered to be in the same group as the KKK, these like wackos that supported Donald Trump but didn't really compromise a large or significant contingency within his base of support.
Yeah, just creepy goofballs.
Yeah, the guys that just watch porn and eat pizza in their underwear on the internet and complain about fucking Jews and whatever.
Yeah, no. They don't do that. They have smart haircuts and they wear sharp clothes and
wear suspenders.
give really good interviews.
Yeah. And,
apparently.
Yeah, and are now media savvy. So when Hillary Clinton acknowledged them, that was the moment when they became part of the mainstream discourse.
Well,
when the opposition political candidate acknowledges that, it was a mistake, I think, on Hillary Clinton's part. I think if she hadn't have mentioned them at all,
she would have won the election.
No, she wouldn't have. But
well, maybe.
We wouldn't be in exactly the same political climate that we are now. But 2016 was definitely the year when racism became mainstream. You know, when it wasn't just like some shit your fucking uncle said and, you know, didn't actually want to say it in public for fear. Just the fact that all the fucking hate crimes that have skyrocketed in the United States in the wake of Donald Trump's election, where the racists, the fucking neo-Nazis, are emboldened by his victory and aren't scared to voice their disgusting, putrescent filth of opinions anymore. You know, at the end of the day, the racists feel like the president of the United States has their back, and they're allowed to do whatever disgusting, racist, misogynistic shit that's to them it's acceptable now, and maybe even in America, because maybe it's acceptable in America now.
Well, all I'll say is misogyny and racism have been acceptable in America for a long, long time.
Yeah, but I'm talking about shit that's a lot more blatant and gratuitous.
Gratuitousness of racism is I think the disconnect there is more to do with just the way the liberal media has sort of presented it. That their goal has been rather intelligently, for them at least, to simply, you know, don't say what you think. You know, if you're racist, sure, those are opinions you have, but you don't say them out loud. You don't express them. You don't tell other people about them necessarily.
Yeah, and 2016 was the year when it became acceptable to
fine,
do that.
But that's no more than that's a festering wound that we now actually see, as opposed to just it still just rotting somewhere unexposed.
Okay, sure, but if you're correct, but if it comes down to some poor woman on New York Street wearing a hijab getting set on fire because she's wearing a hijab, or not get set on fire, I would choose the latter. We can't address racism in the United States without also addressing the economic crisis, okay? So this is a big fucking picture. So I lament the poor people that will be targeted as a result of the neo-Nazi filth being emboldened by the victory of the proto-fascist Republican Party victory in the United States.
I basically agree with you there. I mean, maybe we're just sort of disagreeing over some of the details here. Ultimately, it is bad.
Yes.
And it is worse.
Yes.
Yeah, neo-Nazis in America doing well.
And Europe. And
doing well for themselves. And
maybe Canada in the
Philippines
future.
as well.
Oh, yeah. We'll get into that later.
Yeah, Russia.
It's funny. We're only at number 3, and we have like 30 things on this list.
Oh, we're going to blow through some of these pretty quickly.
Oh, we'll see about that.
Well, come on. The next one.
Mac,
the next one is super easy to get through.
Syria.
It's simple.
How the fuck is Syria easy to get through, Mac? Explain that to me.
Okay.
Jesus Christ.
I'm gonna solve this
Syria.
problem.
Do it in five emojis or less.
Five emojis or less. All right. Jesus, Ben. What do you think I am? The president-elect of the United States?
Fucking hell.
No, Syria is not... Okay, first of all, Syria is going to get solved probably in a really horrible and horrific way in 2017. 2016, I'd say, when it comes to, like, Syria, which didn't... Like, the civil war, the whole constant series of different interfighting wars that were going on in Syria as well, didn't start in 2016. But what did happen this year, or last year, was the final... I'd say closing of the door on anything other than basically an imperialist divvying up of the country, one way or another.
Right.
That this is now Syria has gone from being a country which might have a better government to being the war is now basically just about who gets the most influence over the country. Now,
yeah,
that's it.
Russia's winning that war.
Yeah, Russia is winning that war, and there's a surprising number of people who are really happy about that. And there's a surprising number of people who are really unhappy about America losing that war, too. I'm always shocked at the number of people who choose an imperialist power to support and don't really see it that way, I guess.
It's lesser evilism on the big scale.
Yeah, it's people. I've actually talked to people who, within the same sentence, will talk about how stupid Americans were for supporting Hillary simply because she was less evil, less worse than Trump, and then immediately talk about how Russian influence in Syria is a good thing because American imperialism's worse. Like, just within the same kind of breath.
Yeah.
And, I mean, like you've said, and I was being extremely flippant, I mean, Syria is incredibly complex, and it's not something I think either one of us can really comment on other than to say basically that, for the most part.
Yeah.
In the case of why we should include it in a worse things 2016, I'd say because it's still ongoing and has gotten worse this year.
And it was one of the major contributors to the thing that we just talked about 2 minutes ago.
Yeah,
about the refugee crisis.
Right? Also, I mean, it almost seems like a minor thing in 2016, but the threat of, global thermonuclear war between Russia and the United States being increased,
or China, or
by
India and Pakistan,
by the Syrian war,
or
as well.
Yeah,
there's a bunch of them. I mean, if we were going to talk about wars that could happen, we'd be here forever.
Okay, fine. Syria's fucked. I do want to say that I think the only good guys that I can definitively point to in the Syrian conflict and say, I hope these guys do something, that they don't die and they can continue on, is the YPG. I think the YPG is fucking great. And I am not optimistic for them, to be perfectly blunt, in 2017, because if the ceasefire that they have in Syria now holds, hopefully it does.
The current one or the next one?
We'll see. But anyway, the YPG is a group of commie pinko bastards like ourselves that are setting up proto-socialist communes and respecting women. I love... They have some, all female battalions of the YPG, and just the thought of all female battalions killing fucking ISIS scum is delightful.
See, that should be in the... I think that should be included on the good list.
The good list of 2016. Okay, it's first thing.
The number of ISIS... ISISers?
Just call them Daesh. They don't like being called Daesh. It means the bringers of destruction.
See, the problem with that is I've never heard a member of ISIS say they don't like that.
Anyway, what was your point?
It's a good thing. Great. More of them dead. All of the ones of them that died this year.
And the ones that were killed by females, most importantly.
Most of all. That gets a double plus. Good. Yeah.
Okay. So
it's not all bad. You see what I was saying? It's the good and the bad. It's a complex here, but hey, maybe it was actually all right. I mean, there's another part of 2016. ISIS is not going to take over the world. That was definitively proven this year.
That's true.
They're not going to, colonize Mars or anything like that. They're not going to take over the universe.
Look on the bright side. Yeah. The silver lining.
The silver lining. The territories they control will probably just slowly shrink over the next 5 or 10 years.
These might be brutal, putrescent human filth that torture people and burn them alive, but at least they won't colonize Mars.
Yeah, they won't take over the rest of the Earth and spread like a Zika virus.
Okay, so Syria, what's next on our list? Right, global warming.
Well, not just global warming. Global warming's been a major problem for a while that we've done very little about.
Yes.
And hey, you know what? For a country as cold as ours is, we've generally had a bit of a lackadaisical attitude when it comes to global warming. We're like, you know what? We could afford to have it a few degrees warmer. It'd be nice. Longer summers, shorter winters. I mean, that's not how it works, but that seems to be how a lot of people think it works.
As it turns out, the higher north and the lower south that you go, the more extreme the temperature rise. In fact, not too recently, within the last month or so, the North Pole was 20 degrees Celsius hotter than it should have been, and it was actually colder in New York than it was at the North fucking pole.
I guess. I've never been there, to be honest. Never been to New York either. So.
Oh, thank you, devil's advocate. What other
choice little nuggets of wisdom do I have? Well, you know, Ben, the North Pole is pretty cold anyway, so 20 degrees, I mean, whatever. It's still cold up there.
Thank you, Mr. Contrarian Mackenzie. Great. I look forward to your next pointless fucking non-point.
Some people just look at the Arctic and say it's not damn cold enough yet. That's your problem. You're just not satisfied with how...
It's never cold enough for these people.
Never cold enough. Why can't the Arctic be colder?
Yeah. So,
anyway, massive disaster, probably. We'll see.
Hey, we have the Paris Climate Agreement now. That was another good thing to come out of 2016.
Did we put that down in the good list?
Right?
No. Wrong.
I think we did.
I think we put that. I thought that we put that in the bullshit list. Well,
we might have put it in neutral or happy, but in any case, Trump. The only reason why the Paris Climate Agreement mattered at all was because
Clinton was going to win the election.
Was because the United States and China agreed on it. That, like, okay, we can both do this. The two most emissions emitting countries in the world said, okay, this is important. We need to change our shit. We need to do something about it. And then, presumably, now that Trump is, now that Dorito Mussolini is the president of the United States, is not likely to follow through with the Paris Climate Agreement. And as an aside, at this point, I do think that the 21st century is going to be China's century.
I guess. I mean...
What other industrial power is leading in the world right now?
Well, not any, but industry is...
Economic clout matters.
Well, economic clout matters, but that's the problem. The problem of the situation of the economy globally today is a problem of overproduction, which means that the value of productivity is skewed in the opposite direction. Factories are worth less than nothing in many cases. Those factories they keep open in many cases are just losing money, and they're there mainly just because they have sunk costs at this point. Now, I don't mean to say that China won't do amazing things in the next century, but they might not, because their economy is heavily dependent on other countries buying their shit.
Okay, I want to mention something here, because it's something that we forgot to put on our list, and if I don't mention it now, I'm going to forget. The disputes in the South China Sea over territory is another shitty thing that happened in 2016. I think it is the pinnacle of fucking irony, other than the fact that the United States are complaining about a foreign government tampering their... the CIA themselves are complaining about Russia tampering in their elections. I mean, a more ironic statement has never been said, but I think that the fact that China is asserting itself in its own territory and the United States takes issue with this is like the second most ironic thing that's happened. The United States spent, over 100 years asserting itself in Latin America and asserting itself in the Caribbean, asserting itself in Central America, asserting itself on their territorial islands, asserting itself every fucking where else.
Well,
and as soon as China is strong enough to do it themselves in their own backyard, all of a sudden the fucking fragile masculine ego of the United States of fucking America can't fucking handle that.
Well, firstly, it's not exactly their backyard. Spheres of influence is an imperialist concept anyway. China doesn't get to have its own ocean shelf because of how powerful it is. Well, now it can enforce that because of how powerful it is.
That's what I'm saying, though.
But there's nothing about that means it should or
Latin
it should
America
be allowed to.
was treated by the United States as their backyard.
Yeah, and now China's also fighting with other people.
The South China Sea is way fucking closer to China than South America is to America.
It's also close to the Philippines, Japan, Vietnam, and Taiwan. And none of them agree on how that should be divvied up.
Yes, but we're coming to a point in history where China,
three
like
or
I
four
said,
of them are allies of America. So.
Yeah, well, for now. This is China's century, though. This is the point at which China actually asserts its muscle and asserts its influence on whatever sphere it can.
Unless a strong American president stops China. Or, I mean, China.
Or
But we'll get back to all of those wonderful countries in a minute. Next to China is the next thing on our list. The DPRK blew up its biggest nuke this year.
Yay!
I mean, they'll probably blow up their biggest nuke sometime next year or the year after that, or whenever they can get around to it.
And it will be full of rations of people, and they just blow it up in the sky just to prove how powerful
they don't need
they
it.
are.
We don't need any of that.
We don't need your food aid. We don't even need our own food.
Nope.
We'll just fucking blow it all up into
I thought you
the
were going to
sun.
say it was full of people. But yeah, that could also happen. Either one. Anyway, it's a small thing compared to the rest, but it is a worthwhile sort of, check mark. It's been a bad year when the DPRK blew something up.
In conjunction with the fact that apparently Trump doesn't understand why it's important to have American soldiers stationed in South Korea and thinks that it's a waste of money, even though the South Korean government does pay for them to be stationed there, and it would make America less safe to not have American soldiers stationed in Korea, but apparently it's a waste of money, and, America first, make America great again, so
America's
fuck
safe.
it. South Korea and Japan can defend for themselves.
If you want America
apparently.
to be less safe, then who cares? We can get into arguments over what American imperialism should be doing in Asia and the smart decisions that Trump probably won't make.
Yeah.
I don't really care, to be honest. I mean, he can leave them there or take them out. Fuck it. Spend more money on your soldiers. How about you fucking fix your fucking veterans affairs?
Yeah, no shit.
On to the next one. Flint, Michigan had, the city that probably should just represent the nation and the year as a whole.
Yeah. Flint, Michigan.
Flint, Michigan. Water crisis. Now, when I say crisis, that implies some kind of, immediate, sudden disaster or an event or something happens and people are scrambling to deal with the the fallout of it. In this case, crisis isn't necessarily the right word for it. Just sort of continued goings on. Horrible fucking bullshit.
This is more of a pandemic where the actual pipes where people get their water from are putting poisonous lead into it. The water that infants drink, the water that children drink.
And other things. They kept having backflows as well.
The water that children drink.
Yeah.
Michigan was one of the... I think that Michigan is sort of the pilot project for the next stage of American capitalism, whereupon you have a emergency, whatever the fuck, taking control of the laws and the goings on of the state that subvert and are more sort of outrank the actual democratically elected people in Michigan. And so you have these sort of state appointed panels of quote unquote technocratic experts that will make the decisions for the state. A failure of American public administration that this crisis could happen, that people in a city the size of Flint or anywhere at all for that matter could have fucking lead poisoning in the water. The reasonable thing to do would say, yes, human beings are not fit to consume lead. We need to replace the infrastructure so that people no longer consume lead. But that seemed like too fucking difficult of a task.
At this point, I think the reasonable thing to do is abandon the whole city and pay for the relocation of its population to habitable zones in America.
That would feel like surrender.
Yup.
I don't disagree with you.
I don't. At this point, I'm like, well, you want to rebuild the whole water grid?
Well,
which one would be? I expect that second one would actually probably be a lot more expensive.
Okay, Mac. As Trotskyists, we need to be putting forward transitional demands.
Better demands.
And the complete fucking...
Potable water.
Potable water is a transitional demand in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Okay, so just a reminder, this is 2016 recap. We're talking about 2016 where potable water is a transitional demand
of sorts,
for the revolution.
Yeah, well, you got one step backwards, two steps forwards and all that.
Okay, so the next topic is
the big one everyone remembers because it was the one everyone cared about.
Starts with a T, ends with Mussolini.
Starts with a T, ends with Drumpf.
The whole fucking sad spectacle of the American election.
Yeah, not just the ending either. I mean, that was bad too, sure, fine. But that's not even the part that I think really exemplifies the year so much as the whole thing.
The whole process of it.
Yeah, all of it. Every step along the way. Every interview, every leaked recording or tax return or
not tax return
non-thing, or like all of it, all of that together, all of the bullshit, all of the secret attempts by people on both sides to try to snipe the other one out of the water, and how they both Trump's camp and both Clinton's camp saw each other as the weak candidate of their respective parties and wanted to run against.
The worst thing that could possibly happen to America.
Well, and they also saw each other as the weakest candidate that they would like to run against, so they'd have the best chance of winning.
Yeah.
And that is something we did find out from the DNC leaks, was that Clinton and their supporters saw Trump as the worst candidate that the Republicans could field, and they were probably right. And also, therefore, that would be the ideal candidate to run Clinton against, because, you know, her experience and competence and
her celebrity status as a politician.
She's a professional politician with more experience.
Was a professional politician.
Whatever. I can't really imagine a world in which she's not a politician now. So they ran against that and lost, as it turns out.
Well,
not to spoil the ending.
In spite of that, I think that Clinton was probably the only person in the fucking world that could have lost against Trump, because of the anti-establishment fervor that has been ignited in the United States in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, where you have all these people that keep being told on the media that the economy's doing better and everything's rebounding and everything's doing great, except they go to work at their 2 to 3 shitty part-time minimum wage or contract jobs, and don't actually feel like they're doing any better. Yeah,
everyone's treading water or drowning under debt or whatever else is going on, and the arguments made by Clinton, such as, what was it, America is great because it's good, or whatever, or
don't remind me.
We've always been great, or we're still great.
We just need a catchy, slogan, and people will vote for us.
And all that kind of stuff. Yeah, none of that really worked in their favor. And so Trump became president, as all of the prophetic warnings.
His name is pronounced Dorito Mussolini, Mac.
I thought it was Human Garbage Fire.
Oh, I think that's his surname.
Yeah, he changed it to Dorito Mussolini. But it wasn't just Clinton losing. It was also Bernie Sanders losing.
It was Bernie Sanders losing. And because, I think that you probably would agree with me that if Bernie Sanders had been the DNC pick, which in no universe was he going to be, but had he been chosen, I think he probably would have won. He captured, like you yourself have said, that the states where Bernie Sanders did well in the primaries were the same states that some of them were Trump won. Where I don't think the American electorate saw this election as a left versus right battle. They saw this as a establishment versus anti-establishment battle, and Bernie Sanders was both left-wing and anti-establishment in his own way. Was he actually a socialist? No. But was he way fucking better than Clinton and especially Trump? 1,000 times yes.
Now, once again, all I'll say is that I think that the DNC probably would rather have Trump as president than have Bernie Sanders as president.
Well, then they would have actually have to admit their own wrongdoing.
Well, they wouldn't have to admit it. Let's say Bernie Sanders won the nomination, then they just have to not help him and actively help Trump. And then Trump becomes president, Bernie Sanders loses, and they can blame it on Bernie Sanders being a reckless socialist weirdo. And if only we had...
Yeah, but I don't think Sanders would have lost against Trump.
Well, we'll never know.
Well,
unless he runs against him in 4 years.
Where he'll be, almost 80 years old?
Well, he'll be a brain in a jar. Come on. Whatever. It's the future. Well, I mean, we all already know, for liberals, the election was the one and only real terrible thing that happened. By election, I mean the ending.
Well, I mean, the thing, you were asking if had Bernie Sanders been the nominee would he have actually won? Well, apparently if you win 3 million votes more than your opponent, that doesn't necessarily make you the victor anyway. So it's kind of impossible to tell with their electoral college buttfuckery that they have in down south. Which and I've
Trump was right. He was right. The electoral college is a racket.
It is a scam.
Yeah. He was completely right.
And now that he's benefiting from it, he doesn't seem to care so much. Go figure.
Yeah, and Clinton and their supporters kind of just did the same thing, but going in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? Electoral college? Because, before the election actually happened, it looked like if it's close, the electoral college will be a firewall against crazy old Trump.
Yeah, except that apparently they're just all party hacks anyways.
Well, sure. They're all party hacks. It's just two parties. It's a two-party system. You got to vote for one of them.
Well, I think that everyone is content with that synopsis of the American election. We don't really... We've all had enough American election.
Yeah, the American election's over. It doesn't matter anymore. Trump's
Dorito Mussolini is president.
Yeah, the presidency of Trump is a 2017 problem. We don't need to worry about that.
Yeah, we have 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, great.
Left. So cool. What's the next depressing thing on our not even halfway done list?
Well, this takes us back to the summer 2016. I think July 21st. The Orlando shooting, which was a massive shocker for a bunch of reasons. I mean, this one is not particularly... there's not a lot more really to say about it, but I think it's worth being on this list simply because of what a fucking just...
travesty it was.
Yeah, awful.
Yeah.
Just fucking awful.
And I think it highlighted the problem of, gun violence in the United States, the ease of accessibility of guns.
Yeah.
And sure. Of course, more than anything, the non-acceptance, the hate towards LGBTQ people in the Western world.
Yes.
And, well, everywhere in the world.
But even where it's presumed to be substantially less.
Yeah, and it was fucking terrible. And if I were religious, I would pray for the people that died there and their families. But
that wasn't the only one.
But I'm not religious, so I will give them a comradely salute. And I'm sorry for their loss, and it was a very sad thing that happened. And another thing that we neglected to put on our list was the ghost ship fire, where a number of people died in the United States. Are you familiar with that? Well,
no, that one passed me by.
There was basically a sort of artist creative space where people would go and make art, and there's a lot of people that were pushed out of their homes because of the high property prices in the California area, and a lot of them were sleeping on couches in the sort of art center that they had set up in some old fucking warehouse or something, and there was a massive fire there, and a bunch of people died because of the fact that people can't afford to have, a decent apartment or a decent condo or flat because of the skyrocketing property values that Silicon Valley has caused. So because of the unsafe conditions that these people were forced to live in, there was a fire and a lot of people died. So a lot of shitty things happened in the United States, but the Orlando shooting was terrible. And that dovetails nicely into the horrible, depressing attacks in Europe, Turkey,
there
France,
are
Germany.
Too many to list, too many to really go over in any real detail, which is both, I'm kind of glad, because I don't really want to, but I'm also sort of ashamed at the fact that there are so many, I don't even think we really could do them any real justice for the most part.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the one that was in Turkey at another nightclub.
On just before 4 days ago.
Yeah,
on New
I think
Year's
it was on
Eve.
New Year's or 31st or whenever. But yeah, so it counts as a 2016 shitty thing of the year.
Yeah.
And then a whole bunch of other attacks, both related to the wars in Syria and ISIS. And if they wanted to, the news media could have just spent the entire year just reporting on bombings and shootings, and they wouldn't have run out of anything to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That's all of those, and like I said, I mean, there's no way to really give them their due. There's also the war in Yemen between Saudi Arabia,
yeah.
And Christ, I don't even know who the fuck is fighting against. No, Saudi Arabia versus Iran, sort of, in Yemen between two different factions that they are using as a proxy war in Yemen. That conflict is a proxy war between the United States and Iran as well through Saudi Arabia, except Saudi Arabia is also was at the same time supporting ISIS through funds. I mean, you know, their higher up princes or whatever bullshit, stupid aristocratic bullshit they have there, which meant that the Americans were basically funding at certain points both sides of the conflict. Which is both.
That's unlike them.
Well, it's both, you know, morbid and sort of amusing that they're wasting money at least, but also sad because the country has basically just been bombed to shit over and over again for like the last couple of years in a overlapping series of conflicts where it's less and less about Yemen and more about other countries just trying to sort of prove a point to each other, I think.
Meanwhile, the everyday populace is starving
Yep.
and getting completely fucked over.
Just like Flint, Michigan, they're running short of clean water.
Yeah, it's like if Flint had ordnance going off everywhere.
So like Detroit.
Fucking hell, man.
Well, I don't know, man. It's been a bad year.
It's worse than Detroit. And
Okay, yes, you're right. That's fair. Yemen is worse than Detroit.
Okay, cool. So now that you mentioned Detroit, another shitty thing that happened throughout 2016 was a rash of police shootings of unarmed black civilians in the United States. Mm-hmm. I think that we can all agree that this problem has been systemic basically forever, except now the fact that everybody has a fucking cell phone and a video camera on them at all times can actually prove it in a court of law. So,
well, you say prove in a court of law, but you wouldn't be surprised, because I know you're not surprised, but it is surprising in kind of a rationalist sense of the word, how little that matters in most cases.
that the police get off scot-free every fucking time anyways.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter. You can have a
they
videotape.
can on camera choke a man to death.
Yeah, or shoot a
for selling, cigarettes.
shoot someone in the back 7 times.
And the only person that gets arrested is the person that caught the cops on video.
Yeah, because they were charged, I think, with Christ, what was it in that case? It was like obstruction of justice or some fucking nonsense.
You know, that reminds me.
And then they got the guy fired too.
As soon as Donald Trump was elected, the stock prices of private prison companies skyrocketed. Just a fun aside there.
All those police shootings did have an actual, I'd say, positive or mixed response, depending on how you want to look at it, with the Black Lives Matter movement becoming particularly vocal in the States, directly as a response to all these police shootings for the most part. That's at least something that has had a decent impact that sort of steered a lot of the discourse back into sort of social issues, economic issues.
Yeah.
Which is good. And, as far as I'm concerned, we need more of that. Once again, though, it's all kind of a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, the shootings aren't really stopping. They're just, and police officers aren't being consistently convicted when they murder people. So
no, I do like to see the African American community organizing together and fighting against this injustice.
I like seeing anyone fight against injustice.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And so if there's one good thing that can come from this is that Black Lives Matter, because of the tragedies that have happened over the last year, have been given more of a voice to show their concerns. So. Yeah. So if we can see a sort of silver lining of the cloud of all these police shootings, it's that Black Lives Matter is at the very least a name that people recognize and something that a lot of people know more about and in many cases respect more.
I completely agree with you.
Okay, so Mac, this next point on our list of shitty things that happened in 2016.
Yep.
You've told me before that if you had to choose one that bothered you the most, that was the worst possible thing that happened in 2016, that this is it.
Yep.
The following item on our list of shit the 2016 spoon-fed us was the president of the Philippines, Duterte, the self-professed murderer and absolutely massive twat. Yep. So, can you explain to me, let's just give a synopsis of who he is, why he's such a massive twat, and why you would rank him as the number one worst thing of the year.
Well, who he is kind of a non-issue. I mean, he's a Filipino politician who started off as a hardline right-wing mayor who probably killed quite a few people while mayor, became president of the Philippines as sort of and has sort of ridden a wave of anti-drug hysteria, I guess, and not unreasonable hysteria in the sense that the drug lords are killing people as well. But Duterte has been
targeting drug users,
targeting drug dealers, targeting pretty much anybody he thinks is involved in the industry at all, and has explicitly said he doesn't particularly care if average people kill them, or the police do, or whoever, or even he himself. And as far as like why I think he's the worst thing of 2016, I mean, a lot of people will, if the average person you were to ask right now would say Trump, because that's the thing that's just on their mind.
That is the default bad
and if
thing.
you were to ask why, they would probably give some cockamamie reasoning of like, well, yeah, but he's such a crazy person. Think of all the horrible things he might do. And it's like, yeah, but that's all in the future. Why is he the worst thing about the last year? It gets a lot less clear, because then it starts to come down to things like, well, he said a lot of sexist stuff, he's a real bigot, he's a real shit. Those are all true, but there's plenty of politicians who are more racist than Trump is, who've said worse things about women than Trump has said, who've done worse things.
Like people that he's appointed to his cabinet.
Oh, exactly. So, but you wouldn't mention them, but Trump is sort of a lightning rod of sorts, but more of just a charismatic one, of a guy who will just fucking spout off his stupid fucking mouth and will, through that, create this persona of a madman who could do anything, who could, kill anyone. Duterte is that guy. That's his actual, that is what he doesn't say it, he does it.
Because he has actually killed people.
Yes. When he says, I have pushed people out of helicopters, I don't for a minute fucking doubt that.
Yeah.
Like, at all. When Trump says, if I had the chance, I'd kill such and such ISIS leader, I go, oh, he's just a fucking blowhard and he'll say anything. Basically what I'm saying is the reason why I think the president of the Philippines is the worst thing of 2016 is both because of that, I mean, his personality and his willingness to kill people for political power, which is pretty bad in and of itself. Also, on a grander scale, his willingness to be extremely belligerent and reckless when dealing with both China and the United States. I think his ideal world is one in which China and the United States go to war and the Philippines basically can do whatever it wants. And they don't have to rely on either of these two powerful countries for support. I think what he would like is to just play each of them off of each other, which is not good for the world. But it's good for Duterte.
Duterte is kind of like if Berlusconi had been a murderer, he would be Duterte.
Yeah. And then there's the whole fact that the country is still under a martial law, and there's this whole emergency period that it's in right now. And he's promised several times, sort of Trump-esquely, that the drug war will be ended with these harsh measures in 5 months. 5 months goes by, and that the measures just keep getting extended over and over and over again. And the war doesn't seem to be anywhere near ending. And when I say war, I don't mean like the American drug war, where part of it was, CIA operations in South America, but in the country itself, it was mostly putting people in jail and really obnoxious anti-drug ads on Saturday morning cartoons.
Right.
When I'm talking about the drug war in the Philippines, it's not putting people in prison or, cheesy mascots. It's actually killing people. A lot of people. And that's basically why. Those two things. He's a murdering fucking psychopath, and I think he is probably the most likely person to destabilize the world going forward.
Okay.
Even more so than Trump, really.
Well, I disagree with that.
Well,
we'll see.
We will see.
But before we go on to the next shitty thing, let's maybe talk about something good that happened this year.
Yeah, there's been a few good things.
There was like at least 4
There's been
good
lots
things
of good
that
things. I'm
happened
looking at this list. It's almost impossible to get to the bottom of it.
Scalia died last year. That was good.
See, people forget about that. People forget. The problem though is with 2016 gives, or in this case takes, and then gives bad too, because
Scalia, for those who listeners who don't know, it was the last extremely conservative Supreme Court justice of the United States Supreme Court, who was a massive twat by all accounts.
Massive twat? Ben, pure applesauce, sir.
Jiggery pokery.
Yeah. What utter nonsense. You would even call him that.
That man, I think more than any other human being in the United States, held back progress of an entire nation for a whole generation.
You know, when people talk about guys like that, oftentimes it's coached in the language of like he was born in the wrong century, or should have been and in a way, yeah, you can see this guy as like an antebellum Supreme Court justice. His arguments are just as morally vacuous as theirs were in many cases. But I don't think so. In the case of Scalia, I think he enjoyed being a regressive shitbag in a time period he didn't fit in. I think this is exactly where he would want to be, because this is exactly where he can get the most impact.
It's kind of like those guys that wear like medieval shirts and practice witchcraft, and you think that these guys probably should have just been born in like the 18th century. Scalia was like one of those guys, except from a legal point of view, where his self-professed political philosophy and his view on the Constitution was, I am viewing and interpreting the Constitution as though it were 1750, whatever the fuck.
1776.
Thank you.
Come on.
1776. They didn't have, abortion or computers
Indoor
back then.
lights, plumbing,
washing machines, and so his self-professed interpretation of the Constitution was, how would the founding fathers look at this in from their point of view, which is catastrophically stupid. And so he was a vocal supporter of gun rights. He was a vocal opponent of gay rights. He was a vocal opponent of basically anything that resembled progressive legislation in the United States. And I don't think I can remember a time in my life where I woke up one morning and read such and such is dead, and I smiled. Even with fucking Bin Laden, I was like, he should have had a proper fucking trial.
I don't even,
it would have been better if he had rotted in a jail cell.
I don't give two shits as to whether or not Bin Laden got due process, but I would have rather seen that trial happen. I guess the point being, when it comes to some people, you can say there are better and worse ways to go out. But with him, it was, as soon as possible.
Sooner rather than later
that's all
is
that mattered.
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, I don't really care if it was quietly in his sleep or he fell down a cliff or whatever.
Yes.
Don't care.
And so that good thing that happened in 2016 dovetails nicely into a shitty thing that happened in 2016, where Obama's nomination to the Supreme Court got blocked, and it's currently sitting at a tie. And not only is Donald fucking Trump going to decide the next Supreme Court nominee, but he's also going to nominate probably 2 to 3 other ones, because like a bunch of them are in their fucking 80s right now and will probably die at any fucking moment, just like Scalia did. So it is entirely possible that the majority of the Supreme Court justices, or at least the deciding members of whatever decision they're doing, are going to be chosen by a reality TV star named Dorito Mussolini.
It's President-elect Dorito Mussolini. Well, of course, I mean, Scalia dies. Good news. Hooray. Whatever. Gonna get a not Republican hole in the ground to fill that spot. But Obama goes, well, this will be quite difficult, and I can fight this battle. But the Republicans are, surprise, surprise, blocking me and saying, no, there's an election coming up, and it would be totally inappropriate for you to... Unprecedented, which is not really all that true. No. But who cares? The point being is apparently that was a good enough argument for Obama, and... hey, don't worry, everybody. We're certainly going to win the election anyway. So the Democrats will just have a president, come January anyhow. So we'll just appoint the Supreme Court justice we want then anyway. So it doesn't matter if I don't appoint it right now. Nothing important is going on. The Supreme Court can just sort of, shut down for like 8 months. Just go on vacation.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see them just like in like the Bahamas, just hanging out on a beach together. Anyway, as it turned out, as we all know, that did not work out. Like you said, Trump's going to appoint a right-winger, and as he has said...
and probably several other right-wingers, since a few of them are like 80-plus years old.
But he's also said that he wants to, or at least he said during the debates, and so fuck knows why I even care anymore. I'm probably the only person who even remembers this nonsense. But he said during one of the debates that he will appoint a Supreme Court justice that reinterprets Roe v. Wade.
I think that was just an obvious ploy for the evangelical crowd.
Sure, but, I mean, why not appoint a Supreme Court justice that reinterprets Roe v. Wade? What does it matter?
I think he'll probably
just do that anyway.
Appoint a direct family member. That seems more like his style.
He'll probably just appoint himself.
when someone says it's unconstitutional, he'll say, meh, whatever.
Maybe.
Don't care.
I don't know. Does the Constitution say it can't be Trump? Does it say me by name? No? Well, then there you go.
Okay, cool. So what's the next shitty thing?
You want shitty things again, huh?
2016.
Oh, we've had too many good things already.
Okay. You know what? Fine. Let's have something that was mostly bad, but kind of good, but probably will be bad. More. DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yeah.
That was a really big fucking deal this year. Thousands of Native American protesters protested the building of the construction of an oil pipeline below the Missouri River, which was their sacred, lawful treaty lands. The police force treated them like fucking animals. People were injured. They shot water cannons on them in freezing temperatures. One comrade had to have her arm amputated because the police force threw some sort of grenade close to her. In the end, comrades won, and the Army Corps of Engineers has said that they will no longer... they're going to reroute the pipeline. However, the very obvious problem with this is that the Trump administration is very, very in support of the Dakota Access Pipeline, and whatever Obama does right now while he's still in office may very well get undone. The turning point for the DAPL protests was when a bunch of Army veterans decided to go and support them and stay through the cold winter with them, and they brought body armor, they brought gas masks, they brought earplugs, they brought self-defense tools, and I think that was the final straw, because it's one thing for photos of police officers and security people to be physically assaulting Native Americans, a visible minority, but in America, it's another thing for them to be assaulting veterans. So the very day that the veterans decided to go down to the protest camps and stand in solidarity with them, that was the same time where the Army Corps of Engineers was like, yeah, okay, sure, we'll find a different route. We can't afford this publicity disaster, basically.
Well, that was as you said, a bit of a mixed bag. Basically a good result given the circumstances. We'll have to see where it goes from here.
Yeah.
The good news is, I guess, the fact that Obama really wasn't being very helpful in fighting the pipeline anyway.
He's not been very helpful with fighting much of anything.
No, but the good thing about that is that it does mean that they backed down for like purely on the scene reasons. That it wasn't simply the president in power that made a decision. So Trump as president may be faced with the exact same problem and may have to back down anyway too. But that's for 2017 and going forward for a lot of other things, as we've said.
Right. We're talking about the shitty 2016.
Shittiest and best things of 2000.
And 4 best things. 4 or 5 best things.
I'm seeing many. Half a dozen, perhaps. I'll go, you know what? Another good thing that happened, and this is a solid good one, the end of the Colombian Civil War.
Yes. That was a long time coming. That was 50 to 60 years in coming. I think that if there's probably... I would, myself, nominate the end of the Colombian Civil War, the peace treaty with the FARC and the Colombian government, to be the best thing that happened in 2016.
Yeah, that seems about right. Especially considering it almost didn't happen because of that idiotic referendum.
Oh, sure, let's take a fucking 50-year civil war and put it to a popular vote whether or not we think these
Should war end?
Should war end, yes or no? Well, I don't know. These particular FARC members should go to jail, so no, I think the war should fucking continue. Jesus Christ, if there was one fucking thing that shouldn't be put to a popular vote, it was probably this. In my opinion, the lives of fucking tens or hundreds of thousands of people have been killed or affected by the Colombian Civil War. Whatever the public fucking thinks at any given period of time is less important than the end to this conflict that has taken too many lives, that has taken too many people from us.
Yeah,
right?
I think I actually agree with you. I think it is probably the best thing that's happened in 2016. It's a big deal. It's not like a small little, it wasn't this cute and nice. This is a big fucking political change.
Colombians have accounted for one of the biggest sources of internally displaced people and refugees for decades. It's one of the longest standing, most serious conflicts on the world today. So I think that the potential, probable end of the Colombian Civil War is a good thing. And I think it will be interesting to see FARC act as a political party. Because the FARC still exists, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like the peace agreement says that the FARC just has to disappear into the fucking wilderness. No, they're a fucking institution in Colombia at this point, and they will transition to the mainstream political sphere, and they will, in their own words, fight for communism, fight for socialism, whatever that means to them, in Colombia going forward. And I think that might actually be a good move for them.
Well, it can't be any worse than the ineffective war they've been fighting. The guerrilla war, which has always been characterized as slow and steady and a trickle and then eventually a flood. Well, with FARC, it's just been a trickle for a very long time.
Yeah.
Politically, at least. I mean, the violence and the chaos that's been caused by it have never even come close to having some analogous political movement that in some way could even justify any of it.
Yeah, and I think in this way, hey, you know what? It's the first time that the Nobel Committee has issued a peace prize where I thought that was actually a good call.
Do you remember when Obama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize?
Okay, so I'm Obama.
Yeah.
And
it was like right around now when they did it. And they gave it to him, just before he became president.
I'm Obama, and I just won the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, so I'm conducting drone strikes in Afghanistan. I'm conducting drone strikes in Pakistan. I'm conducting drone strikes in Iraq, probably. I basically outsourced the Iraq war to private military contractors like Blackwater.
And then eventually
human rights
ISIS.
abuses are still occurring. But I'm not George Bush. So...
Do you think he has his, this is a total aside, but do you think he has his Nobel Peace Prize in like a place of honor in his home? You know, on the mantle, so that whenever he's sitting at home in front of the fire, having a reflective evening, he can look up at it and smile and nod and go, yes, I am a peacemaker. That was me.
No, I don't think so,
I
actually.
think it's just in a shoebox in his closet somewhere.
I have enough respect for Obama, and I don't like Obama, and I don't like liberalism, and I certainly don't like the Democrats. But I do think that there is something to be said about Obama's character as a human being. Mm-hmm. And I think that Obama probably reacted the same way about receiving the Nobel Peace Prize as Bob Dylan did receiving the Nobel Prize for Literature several decades after he has released an album of importance.
Yeah.
I think that Obama was probably as confused about himself receiving the Nobel Peace Prize as we were seeing him receive it. I don't think that Obama himself believed that he deserved that reward.
Well, you can always say no, but I guess that's just not something he ever learned.
That's impolite.
Yeah, he never was able to say no to the Republicans. Why would he say no to the Nobel Peace Prize Committee?
Exactly.
Anyway, back to the bad shit. Just next door to Colombia, Venezuela has sort of entered a period of serious economic instability, inflation of currency, shortages of most consumer goods.
Toilet paper vacuum.
Yeah. The usual list of litany things and expensive this, that, and the others, McDonald's hamburgers and so forth nonsense. There's not really much else to say on that point other than this is probably going to be a long-term sort of crisis for the country. Unless something seriously changes, which given the political leadership right now who have kind of a wait-and-see attitude. At least the Socialist Party has a wait-and-see attitude. The right wing is basically going, yes, this is great. This makes the Socialists look like total and utter shitheads. And that will eventually give us the opportunity to win an election. And eventually it will. That's really all I really got to say on that.
Okay, well, let's take a nice quick aside into the cybersecurity internet world.
Into the virtual world of fake things and made-up nonsense?
Well, they're not fake things because they actually affect people's lives. And there were two particular things in the security world that are worth mentioning in 2016. The first is Locky. Ransomware is a kind of malware that will infect your computer and encrypt all of your files and try to extort you to decrypt them. And Locky was a new kind of malware that became very prominent in 2016 and has become part of the malware security landscape. Another one, which was arguably more influential and important, was Mirai. It is a particular kind of exploit kit malware that is basically targets the Internet of Things, which is going to be a increasingly big target of security things going forward.
Eventually you get to that critical mass, and I guess what I'm kind of thinking of is like it may very well be that this like 2016 is the year when that critical mass has been hit, because the idea of Internet of Things, you have to have enough things connected to the internet to make that a viable market for malware. When we get to that point, then
2016 has been that point at which...
I guess that's what I'm sort of thinking here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact of the matter is, though, that you would think that if enough of these devices become victims to enough malware campaigns, that maybe we would rethink our security perspective on how we do things.
What?
But the logic of capitalism is such that we produce things for cheap, we sell a lot of them, we make a lot of money.
Sure.
What the fuck do we care if we can update the fucking firmware on some camera? That is not a financial concern. And so capitalism doesn't care about security, it cares about profits, right?
I do think that's the case, but that's more of a long-term thing. And we're getting a little bit out of the scope of shitty things of 2016.
Okay, that's fair. What's the next thing? On
next
our
one,
list?
Guantanamo Bay did not close. Now, to be fair, now I just said, let's stay within 2016. Now, to be fair, Guantanamo Bay wasn't closed.
Trump is not going to close Guan-fucking-tanamo.
There's never been a year where Guantanamo Bay was closed, so you could argue it wasn't a 2016 thing. But Obama promised that he would, and by God, if there was one thing I actually believed that he was going to do, it was that. Everything else was fucking rhetoric and talking and bullshit. And I thought...
You had too much faith in
I had one piece of faith, one little shred, one thing I was like... Yeah, it's an executive order. It's a fucking slam dunk. It's
Easy
a fucking
peasy.
It's a disgrace to America. It's good propaganda.
It's but one signature away from being closed.
And any number of things. I was like, he'll just move them to some black site in Poland. I don't know, but he'll close Guantanamo. Surely, nope. It's still open and probably will be for 8 more years or more. Who knows? Maybe one of Trump's kids will run for president after him. We'll see. Well, like I said, like I've been saying, like I will continue to say forever and ever after, 2016 was not all bad. And in fact, in many ways, it was a good year.
Fuck you.
Yeah, well...
How the fuck was it good? Explain yourself.
All right, well, there was the Indian General Strike, the largest strike in human history, the French General Strike, which was against the Socialist Party as well, which got some really interesting movements out of it, both of which were in countries that historically and, well, currently, I should rather say, lots of people on the left have sort of sworn off as, these sorts of things do not happen anymore, even to the point of just saying there's no working class that goes on strike anymore like that. Well, it's good to see that that's still around, and not just still around, but bigger than ever.
Well, you would expect that kind of thing to maybe happen in France, but it's actually kind of cool to see it in India, where they don't have as much of a organized working class movement.
Depending on who you talk to, you'll get excuses for why neither country should ever have that happen. France is too wealthy, and they're basically the working class is bought off. Therefore, they're never going to go on strike. India is too disorganized and backwards. Therefore, they'll never go on strike. At a certain point, you can be a so-called leftist and basically just swear off the working class everywhere on Earth as, flawed in some way, and therefore never willing to do what you want them to do. But that's a bit of a side point. The point being is that, the working class did show its power this year, and not in a small way, in the biggest way it really has for really more than a generation. And then there's a lot of other smaller things, like Uber lost a bunch of money. Which was great.
Fuck you, Uber! Yep. Enemy of the working class. Fuck
I know you're happy to hear that, but that was this year. That was 2016. You got 2016 to thank for that.
Okay. I don't think that Uber losing some money outweighs the travesties that 2016 brought us.
California legalized weed, which was not really a big deal, but still was... It's 40 million people and all that. Several diseases were eradicated. The Ebola vaccine this year. Several different possible cures for HIV/AIDS as well have been floated, and some of them seem fairly realistic, I guess would be the way of putting it. The point being, at least in medical science, things have gotten a lot better. Technologically, we are as a species are still moving forward, even as our planet and political system decay around us. We are able to somehow squeeze progress out of our own minds, at the very least, which is, of course...
a testament to humanity.
Yes, and we're great. We're very, very good at whatever we want to do.
We didn't talk about Brexit.
Brexit. Oh yeah, Christ. Yeah, that happened. For a lot of people, it's the pre-Trump travesty of the year. Brexit was, depending on who you ask, good, bad, and ugly. Personally, I think it was just ugly. It was, a shake-up that sort of was the precursor to everything else, in a way, everything political throughout the rest of the year. The thing that shouldn't have happened. From a liberal democratic standpoint.
Yeah.
Trump should not become president. Can't happen. Won't happen. Just it's like an inconceivable a thing that cannot be seen. A horror that cannot be even envisioned.
The line that you can draw between liberals thinking that it's unthinkable for the UK to leave the European Union and liberals thinking that it's inconceivable that Trump could win is that they think that their liberal democratic order is sacrosanct. Like it's
the best.
The way of organizing society until you realize the fact that liberalism is itself what breeds this extremism, what breeds the reaction against capitalist neoliberal order.
I guess for them it does tend to become a bit of a question begging. Why don't people love us as much as they should?
Right.
And it's like, well, because they shouldn't, ultimately. I mean,
yeah.
And it goes so far, that logic goes so far where they end up swearing off democracy altogether. People should love us. They don't. Therefore, people are stupid. Therefore, the people shouldn't have power to make these decisions.
Right.
And then, anything from saying the Electoral College is good or bad ends up becoming little more than just an excuse or whatever else. So that's some of the good, bad, and ugly, I guess. Some more bad stuff. We'll wrap it up with a couple more things here. And I mean, there's hundreds of more, so many awful and quite a few good things as well we could mention. But really, there's 7 billion people on the planet now. There's, everyone has a story. Everyone has things that happen to them. There are events and meaningful tragedies and whatnot for everyone. So there's no way to really give everything its fair due. But just sort of get rid of what's left on our list. As I said, California legalized marijuana in the last election. However, the American feds reclassified CBD as a Class A drug,
Yep.
Among other things. I mean, not just that, they also have been going fairly heavy against distributors and whatnot. The drug war, while it's been said to have ended, it's not really ended at all. Now, with fentanyl killing a lot of people, they might end up doing something, but that's really just more of hopeful, wishful thinking. At the end of the day, they might just not do anything. They might just sort of ride the old drug war out as long as they can and not actually have any real vision for how to end it, just like they've been doing for the last 20 years. That's one of the bad things. Also, 2016 was sort of the year sort of closer to home for us. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of our great nation, the Canadian
one of two liberal countries in the world.
Yeah, well, the only one, depending on who you ask.
Vice President of the United States.
Yeah. The last bastion of liberalism decided to ditch the liberalism part, since no one else is. Like any good liberal, he goes with the flow, and the flow is down a fucking toilet. Anyway, 2016 was the year Trudeau decided, yeah, sure, pipelines are fine, and you sign accords in order to break them. Okay, that's the whole point. Lots of cuts coming probably next year, but the groundwork is laid. His decision to try to semi-privatize basically any Canadian asset available is pretty fucking egregious as far as I'm concerned. The highways, bridges, anything that will become either private or private public in some fucking weird way.
Yeah, well, I mean, the liberals always signal left and then turn right.
And they're desperate to raise money without raising taxes or doing anything particularly notable. So he's in kind of a fix as far as, on the one hand, he could do what he promised he was going to do. On the other hand, he could do what he promised his backers he was going to do. So he's got to choose, either the public good or private interests. And looks like he's chosen private interests, which isn't really all that surprising. But this is the year, I think, where that sort of has been the case for him, and has been the case for the Canadian government in general. So it's been a long, hard podcast, but it's been a long, hard year. I know, as I said to you, I think the worst thing that happened this year was the election of Puerto Rico's.
Puerto Rico's?
The Philippines. I was thinking P.
Are you drunk?
No, I was thinking, I don't know.
You're drunk, Matt. Go home.
Well, Puerto Rico's not doing well, too. We didn't even mention them at all.
We didn't even mention them, yeah. Fuck. They're like bankrupt.
Super bankrupt.
Oh, my God.
Ugh. Anyway. So I know I mentioned to you the worst thing that happened this year, as far as I'm concerned, was the election of the Philippines' current president. But I also know that for you it was something else.
Yes. For me, I thought that in spite of all of the really, really shitty things that happened during 2016, and as this podcast bears witness to, the list is long and treacherous. For me, I thought that in spite of all of the horribly shitty things that happened in 2016, the death of Fidel Castro, I think, was the saddest worst thing that happened. He was a larger than life figure, and I think that his death probably couldn't have come at a worse time. Right after Trump winning, it was like, fuck, man, right when we needed you the most. And he was old, and he hadn't been leading Cuba for quite some time. He was ill. I think he was 90 years old. And so I suppose it shouldn't have really come as a surprise. But it was just kind of uncanny where, of all fucking years, that of course he would have died in 2016. There's one interesting quote from him that I think is kind of appropriate for 2016. And he said that, "I will not die until the United States has been U.S. imperialism or whatever has been destroyed." He died, right after Trump got elected, so he was being prophetic and he didn't even realize it.
Like you say, he was 90, he was quite old. But that's like a lot of the awful things, and a few of the good things as well that have happened in 2016. 2016 seems like just the year of things coming home to roost. All those things that, whether you warned others about it or not, it was all stuff that, unless things changed, were kind of inevitable. Mm-hmm. And, the death of anyone is, as we all know, inevitable. But like so many things in 2016, no matter how inevitable we know a lot of this stuff is, it still always feels like maybe we could have, if only we had a bit more time, maybe another year before Castro died. Or maybe if only, someone like Trump being elected, maybe 2018, if we could just put all this stuff off.
A little bit longer.
Just a little bit longer, all of it. Just put it off for a little bit longer. And I think 2016 was just the year that history and the world just couldn't put these things off forever.
Yeah. I think in terms of Cuba and Fidel Castro's legacy, I think the most important thing about it is that, the United States has spent the entire post-war period bullying Latin America and propping up right-wing fascist dictatorships in Latin America that abused human rights, that tortured people and aggressively, ruthlessly enforced the interests of international capital at no regard for the citizens of Latin American countries. And Cuba showed not just Latin America, but the whole fucking world that there was an alternative, that you could flip off the Americans and still win. People have their criticisms of Cuba in terms of, freedom of speech and blah, blah, blah. But I have a short little clip here from the BBC that sort of refutes, to some extent, the mainstream view of Castro and of Cuba.
I'm joined now by Dr. Denise Batten, who's Associate Professor within the University of Southampton Business School. She spent many years exploring Cuba and the leadership styles and contrast between Fidel and Raul Castro. A very good afternoon to you. Is this so? The headlines, end of an era, things are going to change, etc. Is it the end of an era?
Oh, it certainly is. I think Fidel Castro must be the longest political leader, 5 decades. He was in power, so it is the end of an era, yes.
You've been looking at the leadership styles between the two brothers, but let's look at Fidel Castro first of all. He ruled with an iron fist, didn't he?
Well, that's something everyone's fond of saying, but when I talk to the people who live in Cuba and the Cubans who've come to live in the UK, that's not the story that I get. The feeling that comes through is of Fidel Castro almost as a father figure. So the older generation tend to see him as a hero of the revolution. They're aware that many of them wouldn't even be here if it wouldn't have been for the health advances and the sort of equalisation of resources that he provided. It's mostly, I think, the newer generation who were born under the special period when it was chronically poor with the embargo, Soviet withdrawal of funds. And some of them blame Fidel Castro for the hardships they went through, but some of them blame the US embargo. By no means is Fidel Castro held to blame by most people of Cuba. I think most people blame the embargo.
But what about, how do you rationalise that with his human rights record?
Well, you see, that's quite interesting as well. Again, when you talk to Cubans, many of them say I'd rather be in a Cuban jail than Guantanamo Bay. And when I was talking to a Cuban who left Cuba, And I always ask about this human rights issue. And she said, oh, yes, you can't always speak freely. She talked about her neighbour. I said, well, what's the worst thing you can think of? And she talked about a neighbour who used to get drunk and run out in the streets screaming, I hate Fidel Castro. And she said police would pick him up and he'd be put away, but he'd be back again the next day. They'd let him go. A few months later, he'd do the same again. They'd pick him up. They'd give him back. And when I went to talk to people in Cuba, I found it remarkable how freely they all spoke about Fidel Castro and Raul Castro and the policies. I was expecting, from the discourse we hear, that people would be afraid to speak out, and that wasn't what I found. People
Did they speak out, though? Did they speak out? Did they criticise the regime?
Oh, yes. I had the head of a topical newspaper who was quite critical of the government in some ways, not always, but some ways. And I think what it is, the media has been dominated by America. So, for example, when Obama visited Havana, you had the Cuban ladies in white come out to protest against the human rights abuses. And so, of course, that dominates the headlines. But they're paid for by Americans. People don't realise that. An American agency pays for them.
Yeah, but
the Cubans don't take them seriously.
Yeah, but he did carry out human rights abuses. Look, even let's just take one section.
Yes.
Gay people and those with AIDS, completely persecuted.
I think when you look back at the time at which the revolution was considered to be a little bit homophobic, which was in the 60s, I'm not sure many countries could hold their heads up high and say that they were as open as they should be. So I think you have to look at it in context of the period as well.
You seemed quite fond of Fidel Castro, if I could put it that way.
I think what it is, I'm one of these people who've listened to all these news broadcasts, who's been exposed to that the Miami voice was the very dominant voice. And I think I was just surprised when I went there not to find this browbeaten people who felt oppressed. Most of them are very, very proud to be Cuban. They loved and admired Fidel Castro. Not all of them, by all means. But even those who were critical of his policies couldn't hate him. They all thought he was well-intentioned, had integrity. And I think that made me a little bit cross, actually, because I think we've been exposed to a lot of misinformation, and this quite small minority in Florida has dominated the headlines today and over the past 50 years.
So are you saying that what he did, the things that we would see as a human rights abuse, was okay?
Well, do you want to be more specific?
Well, the prisoners, the political prisoners, the problems with gay people, etc., etc.
No, I don't think political prisoners are ever okay, and I don't think persecuting gay people is ever okay. What I'm disputing is that Fidel Castro or Cuba was any worse than any other country. I think if you expose America to the same lens, I think you'd have a stack of crimes that would overshadow what Fidel Castro has done. I think the important thing to realise is the moment Fidel came into power in the revolution, at the time in which there's very strong anti-communist feeling, the Americans did everything they could to subvert that. They invaded in the Bay of Pigs. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a response to an expected additional invasion. And there was, I think, an estimated 638 CIA-sponsored attempts on Fidel Castro's life. So I think you have to understand the responses and the fear of open speech in the context of a constant aggression coming from 90 miles over the water.
Dr. Denise Baden, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fidel Castro was, whatever you think of him, he was an inspiration for tens of millions of people around the world. He showed the world that there is an alternative to U.S. imperialism, that developing third world countries can fight back and they can fucking win.
Yeah, you know me. I'm a miserable curmudgeon and critical of just about everything.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
Yes. So when it comes to Castro, who is both larger than life, as you said, and also a very contentious historical figure, it would be very easy for me to simply say, well, he was contentious, or well, he did these things I didn't like, and therefore just sort of wash my hands of the whole thing. Cuba doesn't matter because it's not the kind of thing I want exactly, and therefore we're done. But I think I think the serious and more honest appraisal that I can really give of both Castro and his legacy is that, one, I think the world the world, not just Cuba, but the world is a better place for having him in it, or having had him in it. And secondly, I think that one of his earliest and most famous quotes about how history will absolve me, I think remains true and is the real legacy of Castro. That like all people of that historical stature, there will be plenty of things written about him, plenty of arguments had about him, documentaries and biodramas and all that crap will be made about the man from all kinds of probably mostly negative liberal establishment, capitalist positions. Sure, fine, but the legacy of that fight, the legacy of a successful and audacious conflict with American imperialism, I think will be eternal. And that can't be done away with, no matter how many, hit pieces the BBC or anyone else happens to try to do on him.
One of my favorite stories about Fidel and especially the Cuba's foreign policy was during the 1970s in Angola. This is really, I think, was one of Cuba's shining moments in world history, where to the south of Angola you had apartheid, kind of fascist South Africa, human rights abusing South Africa, racially segregated. And there was an uprising in Angola where they were, at the time, a colony of Portugal still, or administered by Portugal or whatever. And the Angolans rose up and they established their own independent nationalist government and sort of broke the chains of imperialism, as it were. And South Africa did not take kindly to that, and they saw the new government in Angola as a threat to them. And so they decided to invade them. Fidel Castro, people would refer to him as a sort of stooge of the Soviet Union, that he was just doing whatever Moscow told him and, the Cuban Missile Crisis and blah, blah, blah. But Castro actually went to the Soviet Union and was like, hey, Angola is getting attacked. Like, we have to help them. They want to establish, their own government, their own independent foreign policy, just like we have, And so we need to stop this. This is unacceptable. And the Soviet Union actually said, like, no, don't worry about it. It's in Africa. It doesn't matter. It's none of our concern, basically. And Castro said, you know what? Fuck it. We'll do it ourselves. I don't care if the Soviet Union's telling me no. This is our moral obligation to help Angola. So as the South African fascist forces were encroaching upon the capital city of Angola, and everyone didn't know what the fuck was going to happen, and right at the crack of midnight, just before the forces, the fascist apartheid South African forces were marching into the capital city, the Cuban military showed up in their boats and landed on the shores of Angola, and they beat those fucking fascist insects back into the dirt and absolutely fucking humiliated the apartheid government in South Africa. Because for them, being white supremacists and all, losing to, a black country was mortifying, embarrassing to them. And it was all because of Fidel Castro breaking ranks with what the Soviets were saying. For him, it was, the revolution was never even going to be communist at the beginning. He didn't want Cuba to be a stooge of the American mafia and American capitalists. And so even when his new ally, the Soviet Union, told him that he couldn't do something, he was like, no, it's more important that Cuba decides for herself what to do. And they won. And for years after that, they helped Angola with humanitarian concerns like sending doctors, sending social workers, sending aid, and helped not just fight back the apartheid forces, but also helped develop their economy. And, I feel like that, among with countless other examples, just showed that he really cared about people, that he cared about Cuba.
There are so many ways. I mean, there are so many things that Cuba did that no one else did. And even now, even though, the 1970s in Angola and the sort of spreading of the revolution seems to have sort of waned, the thing that is still, and I'd say, if there's two things that people in Canada or in the West know about Cuba, it's that, A, it's an evil dictatorship run by some kind of autocrat, power-hungry, iron-fisted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And B, they're doctors. The healthcare, the social services that they both provide to their own citizens and provide to any country or any place that they have an opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
And even people I know who will be just blithely write the whole country off politically as just sort of, an evil empire kind of crap, still will say, like, yeah, and their doctors are, like, the best in the world outside of a few couple you could argue Canada. You could look at the healthcare services in a relatively small number of countries being clearly better than Cuba, and even then, access is usually the problem, even in places like Canada or in Europe or wherever. And in the case of Cuba, they've not only met the standards, the highest standards of healthcare in the world, but have been able to achieve it in a much more egalitarian way.
Yeah, and exceed them.
Yes.
Cuba has a better life expectancy than the United States. They have a better maternal mortality rate. They have a better infant mortality rate. They have a better everything mortality rate.
To be fair to America, their mortality rate is garbage. So, hey, they're worse than a lot of relatively impoverished and corrupt countries. Never mind Cuba.
Yeah. Well,
all of this does tie back to Castro and sort of a basic principle that I think is often forgotten by plenty of socialists, plenty of people on the left. Really, it doesn't matter what your political stripes are. It's easy to lose track of a very basic principle, and that's improving people's lives.
Yeah.
Actually making that a goal.
Yeah.
And in the case of Castro, I can say I sincerely believe that was his life's goal when it came to Cuba and to any place that he had the opportunity to help in any way.
What other fucking country exports doctors? Well, hold on, we do, except it's because of brain drain and the United States private medical industry pays better. But in the case of Cuba, who actually exports them for on a regular...
On the basis of, as an actual program, a government program to send doctors, as opposed to some half-assed, non-profit NGO that, does good work, but the results are never really there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but like an actual state-organized plan to help... Like, every time there's a humanitarian crisis in Haiti or, some outbreak of whatever in Jamaica or anywhere else in the Caribbean, the Cubans are always the first there, and they've always been the first there. And they truly want to help people and improve people's lives. And, what you said also reminds me of this article I read recently on Al Jazeera that was talking about Castro's death. And he was saying that these Western media outlets that I contract for, all they want to hear is, like, for me to ask people about their lack of free speech and their lack of rights and how horrible it is, how bad is it living under a dictatorship. And the Cubans seem to get really annoyed with this question, these seemingly endless questions about, their freedom of speech and whatever and their individual rights. Like, why don't you ever ask us about, the fact that I can just get free healthcare whenever I need it? Why don't you ask me about how fucking awesome it is that I get free post-secondary education? Why don't you ask me about any number of good things about this country and things that we're proud of about this country, and you always want to point out the bad things? The article concludes in an interesting way where he's saying that the sort of very restrictive lens that the West views Cuba is, just as Orwellian as the system that they think that they're criticizing, where they have these, like, blinds on where they only want to see this one thing, and they won't open their eyes to see the broader picture that, actually the Cuban Revolution has had some really tremendously positive gains for the people there, and, especially a lot of the older Cubans will appreciate that the equalization of resources and the social programs that they have, if it weren't for that, a lot of them wouldn't be there.
It would be the country would just be like Haiti.
Exactly.
And
or Jamaica.
No one wants that.
Yeah.
This is the problem, I guess, is like even when the comparisons come down, pick a country to compare Cuba to, relative regionally, relative population-wise, relative resource-wise. They're all not just worse materially, but quite often worse even on the basis of free speech and democracy.
Yeah.
The level of corruption in governments throughout the Caribbean is just horrendous.
Yeah.
And then there's Cuba, which is the always outlier, the one that always doesn't do things the way everyone else does it.
And somehow always does better at the end of the day.
Yeah.
In spite of all odds, in spite of the embargo, in spite of all sorts of aggression from the United States, in spite of 630-some assassination attempts on Fidel Castro's life.
Some of them were pretty crazy.
The exploding cigar.
Yeah, that was a good one. I mean, that's just...
too many variables.
To be a fly on the wall during that CIA meeting, you know? That would have been great. Just to, like, I want to know the guy who first came up with that.
That said, this is our best shot.
They're just fucking getting boozed up at a local bar, and they're like, you know, he smokes a lot of cigars. Maybe we can use that.
You know, what you said before about comparing Cuba to other countries in the region, I think is poignant, because every fucking time that a liberal or a conservative mainstream journalist or economist or politician or whatever talks about Cuba, they say, oh, they're so poor, communism doesn't work. Look at this inefficient communist system with all of these, you know, problems. And for some fucking reason, when you point out the social problems in capitalist countries, you're not allowed to say, oh, look at how bad capitalism has failed these people. It's the most blatant fucking double standard, you know, where you have, like I said, Cuba has a better life expectancy than the United States, and somehow that's not shown as a victory for socialism, but that's just a fucking, you know...
incidental detail, maybe a footnote,
hand
whatever.
wave that aside, and, you know, yet we as socialists can't seem to conversely criticize capitalism for the inadequate life expectancy in countries like the United States and elsewhere.
Well, and it becomes absurd to the point where, yes, when comparing the United States of America to Cuba, which apparently is an appropriate and reasonable thing to do, Cuba often comes out well behind when it comes to matters of economic growth and infrastructure and a lot of other interesting and, to be perfectly honest, you know, important things. Sure. But how the hell, like, how fucking amazing is it that that's the country they keep getting compared to over and over again? Like, that alone should be a decent example of what socialism, even of the poorly implemented kind in Cuba, can do. Like, that... You can take what would in any other circumstances be a country that would be completely forgotten by the world into a country that time and again has to be compared to America in order to make them look bad.
Yeah. And one thing I think is funny, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's 2016 related, where, you know, the Obama, after having been shunned by the Organization of American States in recent years because of America's stance on Cuba, so they decided to normalize relations with Cuba in order to sort of gain standing back in the Organization of American States. And now that Trump is president, he is turning around and says, well, we need a better deal with Cuba. And he is so fucking stupid that he doesn't realize that the normalizations of relations with Cuba was in America's interests, and that is why they were doing it.
Well, sure. That's I mean, this is getting a little off track as far as related to Castro goes. Yeah. But I will say, sure, I'm not in the business of giving imperialism advice, however. Yeah, if they want to fuck up, fine. But that sort of gets into a lot of the influence and ultimately both the legacy of Castro and the legacy of the Cuban Revolution. And I guess what I'll ask you is, you know, Castro in 2016, he has died. Cuba has not. It's still there and still strong.
Viva Cuba.
Yes, exactly. So what do you think his legacy is going forward? I'd like to be, even with this last year, I'm always desperately trying to be an optimist, and I'm very bad at it. Mm-hmm. But where do you think that legacy is now? Like, what is that going forward?
It's interesting that you asked that, because in reflecting on that, people always, you know, refer to Castro as some bloodthirsty, iron-fisted dictator. His last wish was that no monument be made of him, that no buildings be named after him, that no plazas be named after him, no streets, no nothing. Because he wanted the Cuban people to believe in themselves, you know, and that the Cuban Revolution was about them. It wasn't just about him, you know? And this is the exact opposite kind of behavior that you would expect out of a fucking bloodthirsty dictator, right? And I think that even more than anything, shows that, you know, for him it was all about Cuba. It was about, and after that, fighting imperialism and fighting for the rights of the poor and the oppressed and the people that need the most help. And I don't think that died with Castro at all. So I think that, Raul is running the country now, and he's 85 years old, so there's going to be a change of guard pretty soon, so
sure.
Time will tell, you know, what that means. But, you know, ever since the Soviet Union collapsed and Cuba lost, like, you know, most of their trading partners at the time, they went through a really, really hard time. And a lot of the younger people in Cuba, especially who lived through or grew up during the special period, hold a lot of resentment towards the status quo for perfectly understandable reasons, you know. But I think that Cuba is being more pragmatic now. I think in terms of Cuba, you know, from a perfectly socialist standpoint, I'm not sure which Marxist said this, but an island of socialism cannot exist in a sea of capitalism, and this is fucking literally true in the case of Cuba. And I think that without an industrialized, advanced capitalist country, coming to their aid, that they're going to continue to have to reform their economy. China seems to be coming to Cuba's aid, and China might actually play that role.
Well,
you know, they're opening up a new electronics factory in Cuba, where they will be manufacturing laptops and tablets, and with the assistance of one of the major electronics companies in China. So they might actually, I mean, Cuba, every fucking problem that you can throw at Cuba, every single obstacle, they seem to be able to bounce back and still come out winning at the end of the day. For all the hardships that they have experienced, for all of the aggression that they have suffered at the hands of imperialism worldwide, still somehow they're still here, and they're still adapting, and they're still surviving. And
they're like the one pimple on American imperialism. The one thing that they just can't get rid of.
Well, there's a few pimples at this point, but
yeah, sure.
I see your point. Yes,
just that the one thing that never went away.
Yeah,
and still kept being that one in some cases, and more recently, I guess, arguably the only real voice of both socialism and of like a clear, direct alternative to capitalism. Because while I mean, good luck to them, I guess, if you want to try to balance between China and the United States, because certainly Canada's going to be doing that going forward to try to maintain independence. But ultimately, to me at least, the thing that really makes Cuba the exception and worth talking about, and the reason we talk about it for the most part at all, is because of socialism, because of a planned economy, because of an economy whose purpose is to improve people's lives. Mm-hmm. One way or another. Now, whether that is always every year is always successful or not, or whether there are special periods, is a slightly different problem. But that, to me at least, the legacy of Castro and of the revolution isn't necessarily anything specific that they did. It's not any one thing. And while I can be, you know, some of them I'm amazed and ecstatic about, and some of them I'm a bit ambivalent towards, or even negative towards some of the things that have happened in Cuba. It's not those specific things that really are, I think, the inspiration to me, but more of the general proof of concept that it provides. Yeah. And while applied imperfectly and incompletely and in a very narrow single island sort of way, that proof of concept is something that anyone from here on out can sort of look to and read about and sort of draw from in their own revolutions or in their own movements or in any kind of thing going forward. And Castro himself is just a well of resources in that regard, both good and bad, ultimately.
Castro was the literal embodiment of those ideas, where he was truly a person that dedicated his entire life and his 110% to the people of Cuba, to making their lives better, and to advance causes in the world that helped people. You know, I truly think that he was one of the greatest people to have ever lived. I think he was really a truly brave man, and someone that stuck to his ideals and truly dedicated himself to the lives of others. So
there are a few, you know, in the modern world, everything feels very short-term and immediate, and sort of everything sort of centers around memes and Twitter posts, and, well, particularly the President of the United States now.
Who can fuck himself, just
yeah,
by the
exactly.
way.
But everything feels very transient and ephemeral and ultimately meaningless. But I guess for me, at least, the loss of Castro to me isn't really even about the man himself or what he did or the fact that a single person has died. It's that physical connection to history. And so long as he was alive, it felt that history always felt a little bit closer, a little bit more real. And now that he's gone, we're just sort of, it feels that history just feels a little bit further away and a little bit harder to understand.
Not only just feels like the end of an era now, but it really feels like his death kind of verified that the world is going into a new era itself with his death. You know, that his passing truly was, truly indicated that 2016 was a year of massive change, that we are entering a new period in history now where the game has sort of changed.
That's, I guess it's the one big lesson of 2016, is that whether we're ready for it or not, things change. And to me, at least, looking back at it and looking at the legacy of people like Castro and many others, the one big positive thing I can take from all of them is that, you know, it's never wrong to prepare for that change, and it is possible, no matter how dim things seem now, that victory, success, both the cause of socialism and the improvement of people's lives and the defense of people's lives is always possible and is always worth fighting for.
In spite of all odds.
No matter what the odds are. That doesn't matter. And like he said, you know, if we lose, we'll just try again. We'll just come back again.
Yeah, I think that if there was one thing that Castro's life and his legacy shows us, it's that in spite of the whole stack of cards being against you, that you can still fucking win, you know?
Yeah.